Throughout history, the spread of ideologies, religions, and cultures has followed recognizable patterns. Scholars of geopolitics, sociology, and religious studies have documented how Islam, as both a faith and a political system, has expanded across different regions of the world. Understanding this process is not about promoting fear or hatred toward Muslim individuals, but rather about examining a well-documented historical and contemporary phenomenon that affects governance, culture, and social policy in Western nations. The story begins not with violence or sudden takeover, but with something far more gradual and systematic. It begins with migration. When Muslim populations begin moving into a new country, the initial numbers are small and largely unnoticed. These early arrivals are often economic migrants or refugees seeking better living conditions. They are hard-working, law-abiding, and integrate reasonably well into the host society. At this stage, which researchers and analysts sometimes refer to as the early settlement phase, the Muslim population represents less than 2% of the total population. During this period, there is virtually no political pressure, no demands for special accommodation, and no visible tension. The host country welcomes these newcomers with open arms, celebrating diversity and multiculturalism as social virtues. This is the foundation upon which everything else is built. As the Muslim population grows beyond 2% and begins approaching 5% of the total population, something important begins to happen. The community starts organizing itself. Mosques begin appearing in neighborhoods, not just as places of worship, but as community centers that serve multiple social functions. Islamic schools are established, offering an alternative to the secular public education system. Halal food sections appear in supermarkets, and local businesses begin catering specifically to Muslim consumers. None of this is inherently sinister on its own. Every immigrant community builds its own infrastructure. However, what distinguishes this phase is the deliberate nature of the institution building. Organizations such as the Muslim Brotherhood, which was founded in Egypt in 1928, have published detailed strategic documents outlining how Muslim communities in Western nations should establish themselves. One such document, discovered by Swiss authorities in 2001 and later entered into evidence in United States federal court proceedings, described a strategy of settlement rather than immigration. The document explicitly stated that the work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house. This is not a fringe interpretation. It represents a documented strategic framework that has influenced the development of Muslim community organizations across Europe and North America. The infrastructure being built during this phase is designed to maintain cultural and religious separation rather than integration. Once the Muslim population reaches approximately 5 to 10% of the total population, the third phase begins. This is where political engagement becomes a central strategy. Muslim community organizations begin lobbying local and national governments for specific accommodations. These demands often appear reasonable in isolation. Requests for halal food in public schools and prisons, prayer rooms in workplaces and universities, and exemptions from certain dress codes all seem like straightforward religious accommodation requests. Western liberal democracies built on principles of religious freedom and tolerance are structurally predisposed to grant these requests. To refuse them would appear discriminatory. However, each accommodation sets a legal and cultural precedent that makes the next demand easier to justify. Simultaneously, Muslim political candidates begin running for office at local and then national levels. They are often highly educated, articulate, and skilled at navigating Western political systems. They build coalitions with progressive political parties that champion minority rights and multiculturalism. This gives the community political representation and influence far beyond what raw population numbers might suggest. In the United Kingdom, for example, cities like Birmingham, Bradford and Leicester have seen significant shifts in local governance as Muslim populations have grown. In the United States, cities like Dearborn in Michigan have elected Muslim-majority city councils. These are not conspiracies. They are the natural result of a community organizing itself politically, but the direction of that political organization is consistently toward greater accommodation, Islamic law and practice within secular legal frameworks. As political influence grows, cultural pressure intensifies. This is perhaps the most subtle and yet most powerful phase of the transformation process. Western societies pride themselves on tolerance and the free exchange of ideas. However, Islamic doctrine, particularly in its more orthodox forms, does not share this commitment to pluralism. As Muslim communities grow in size and confidence, criticism of Islam becomes increasingly difficult. In Europe, several countries have passed hate speech laws that have been used to prosecute individuals who criticize Islamic doctrine or practices. This creates a chilling effect on public discourse. Journalists, academics, and politicians who raise concerns about Islamic expansion find themselves labeled as Islamophobes, a term specifically designed to shut down legitimate debate by framing any criticism as irrational prejudice. Meanwhile, in neighborhoods with high Muslim populations, non-Muslim residents often report feeling social pressure to conform to Islamic norms. Women are sometimes harassed for not covering their hair. Alcohol consumption in public spaces becomes socially fraught. Non-halal restaurants and businesses face economic pressure. These are not isolated incidents but documented patterns observed across multiple European cities. The Swedish city of Malmö has been widely studied as a case where rapid demographic change has led to significant social tension and the departure of non-Muslim residents from certain neighborhoods. The fifth and most advanced phase involves what political scientists call institutional capture. This occurs when a community gains sufficient influence to reshape the institutions of the host society, rather than simply participating in them. In the United Kingdom, Sharia courts have been operating since 1982, initially handling civil matters such as marriage and divorce within the Muslim community. There are now estimated to be over 80 such courts operating across the country. While they technically operate within the framework of British law, critics argue that they frequently produce outcomes that are incompatible with British legal principles, particularly regarding the rights of women. In Belgium, the city of Molenbeek became internationally notorious following the 2015 Paris attacks as a community where local governance had effectively broken down and Islamic social norms had replaced secular Belgian ones in many aspects of daily life. Police reported difficulty operating in certain areas. Local officials acknowledged that parallel social structures had developed. This is not unique to Belgium. Similar dynamics have been observed in parts of France, Germany, the Netherlands, and Sweden. The term no-go zone, while controversial, reflects a real phenomenon where state authority has been weakened in specific geographic areas with high concentrations of Muslim residents who reject integration into the broader national culture. Understanding this process is essential for Western societies that wish to preserve their foundational values of individual liberty, gender equality, freedom of speech, and secular governance. The challenge is not Islam as a personal faith practiced by millions of peaceful individuals who contribute positively to their societies. The challenge is political Islam, also known as Islamism, which seeks to use the mechanisms of Western democracy to ultimately replace those mechanisms with governance based on Islamic law. Western nations face a genuine dilemma. The values of openness, tolerance, and multiculturalism that make Western societies admirable are precisely the values that can be exploited by movements that do not share those values. A society that tolerates everything, including movements that seek to destroy tolerance itself, faces what philosopher Karl Popper called the paradox of tolerance. Popper argued that unlimited tolerance must lead to the disappearance of tolerance. If we extend unlimited tolerance even to those who are intolerant, if we are not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of the intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed and tolerance with them. The path forward requires honest, evidence-based conversation about immigration policy, integration requirements, and the limits of religious accommodation within secular legal frameworks. It requires distinguishing between Muslim individuals, who deserve dignity and respect, and Islamist political movements, which represent a genuine challenge to Western civilization. Nations that have begun implementing stricter integration requirements, such as Denmark and Hungary, offer models worth examining. The survival of Western liberal democracy depends on its willingness to defend itself with the same conviction that its challengers bring to their mission of transforming it.